Daniel Carter woke up to the same sound he had heard every morning for the past 8 months. The soft shuffle of feet outside his quarters, followed by complete silence. He knew who it was without looking, and he lay there for a moment before. Pushing himself out of bed and opening the door, she was standing there, just as she always was, her large dark eyes watching him with an expression he could never quite understand. Princess Valara Shenkai of the Cathari Empire did not greet him, did not nod, did not make any sound at all. She simply turned and followed him as he made his way to the small kitchen of his cargo ship. The dusty Horizon Daniel had stopped finding this strange about 6 months ago, and now it was simply part of his routine. Wake up, find the princess waiting, go about his day with a silent shadow trailing behind him. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the worn metal table. Gesturing to the seat across from him, Valara sat down gracefully, her silver skin catching the dim light of the ship. Her hands folded neatly in her lap, she watched him drink his coffee, and he watched her watching him, and neither of them said a word. This was how it had been since the day she arrived. Daniel remembered that day clearly. Remembered the cold efficiency of the Cathari officials who had brought her aboard his ship without any real explanation. Her brother, Ambassador Korath Shenkai, had handed Daniel a stack of diplomatic papers and told him that the princess would be observing human behavior as part of a cultural exchange program. When Daniel had asked how long she would be staying, Korath had simply smiled in that way the Cathari did when they thought humans were being foolish. As long as necessary, he had said, and then he had left without looking back at his sister. Even Ansa Valara had stood in the cargo bay that day, small and pale and completely motionless, and Daniel had realized very quickly that something was wrong. Not wrong in a dangerous way, but wrong in a sad way. The kind of wrong that made his chest feel tight. She did not speak, and at first Daniel had assumed it was a language barrier. But his translator worked perfectly fine with every other Cathari he had encountered. He had tried talking to her those first few weeks, asking her questions about her home, about her interests, about anything at all. She never answered, never even opened her mouth. Just watched him with those large dark eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 words she could not say. Eventually, Daniel had stopped asking questions and had simply started talking, telling her about his day, about the cargo runs, about the planets they passed and the stars they flew through. He told her about Earth, about the blue oceans and green forests, about the cities that glowed at night and the quiet countryside where he had grown up. She listened to everything, and sometimes he thought he saw something flicker in her eyes, but she never made a sound. Daniel finished his coffee and stood up, carrying his cup to the small sink and rinsing it out. "We have a delivery to make at Waystation 12, he said over his shoulder, not expecting a response and not getting one. Should take about 3 days to get there, and then we can resupply. Before heading out again, Valara rose from her seat and followed him to the cockpit. Settling into the co-pilot chair that had become her unofficial spot, Daniel ran through the pre-flight checks and set their course, his hands moving automatically through motions he had performed thousands of times, as the ship hummed to life and began its journey through the darkness of space. Daniel glanced over at his silent passenger. She was staring out the viewport at the stars, her reflection ghostly against the glass, and there was something in her posture that looked almost like longing. He had noticed things about her over these 8 months, small details that built up into a picture he did not fully understand. She flinched at loud noises, her whole body going tense whenever something unexpected happened. She did not eat when he was in the same room, waiting until he left before touching any food he prepared for. She stood at the observation window for hours at a time, watching the stars pass by with an expression that seemed caught somewhere between hope and despair. Daniel had started keeping a journal about her, not for any official purpose, but because he wanted to understand. He wrote down the way she tilted her head when she was curious, the way her hands trembled slightly when she was nervous, the way she sometimes reached toward him as if she wanted to speak, but then pulled back at the last moment. He did not know why he cared so much about this strange, silent princess who had been dropped into his life without warning. Maybe it was because she reminded him of the soldiers he had served with, the ones who had come back from bad missions with that same haunted look in their eyes. Daniel had been a military medic once, before he left the service and bought this old cargo ship, and he had learned to recognize trauma when he saw it. Whatever had happened to Velara before she came aboard his ship, it had broken something inside her, something that made her believe she was not allowed to speak. The communication console beeped, pulling Daniel from his thoughts, and he reached over to accept the incoming transmission. A message appeared on the screen, official and formal, ordering him to bring the princess to Way Station 12 for a diplomatic meeting with the Kethari delegation. Her brother would be there. Daniel read the message twice before turning to look at Velara, and what he saw made his stomach drop. She had gone completely still, her silver skin even paler than usual, and her hands were gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. For the first time since she had come aboard, Daniel saw something in her eyes that he could clearly identify. It was fear, pure and absolute fear. He did not know what was waiting for her at Way Station 12. But whatever it was, she was terrified of facing it, and in that moment, Daniel made a silent promise to himself that he would not let anything hurt her. No matter what it took, she was his passenger, his responsibility, and whether she could speak or not, he would make sure her voice was heard. Way Station 12 was a massive structure floating in the darkness between solar systems. A place where humans and aliens came together to trade and negotiate and occasionally argue. Daniel had been here dozens of times before, but he had never felt this nervous pulling into the docking bay. Velara had not moved from her spot near the airlock since they arrived, her body rigid and her eyes fixed on the closed door as if she expected something terrible to come through it at any moment. Daniel walked over to her slowly, keeping his movements calm and steady so he would not startle her. "We do not have to go out there right away," he said gently, his voice soft in the quiet of the ship. "If you need more time, we can wait." She turned to look at him, and something shifted in her expression, confusion mixed with disbelief. As if no one had ever offered her a choice before, Daniel felt that familiar tightness in his chest, that anger at whatever had made her this way. "I mean it," he continued, sitting down on a cargo crate nearby so he was at her eye level. "You are not cargo to be delivered on schedule. And if you are not ready to face whatever is out there, we can stay right here until you are." For a long moment, Velara just stared at him. And then she did something she had never done before. She took a step toward him, and then another, until she was standing close enough that he could see the faint pattern swirling beneath her silver skin. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, and Daniel held his breath, waiting, but no sound came out. And after a moment, she closed her mouth again and looked away. It was progress, though, more than he had seen in 8 months. And Daniel smiled at her, even though she would not meet his eyes. "Whenever you are ready," he said simply. Eventually, they did leave the ship, stepping out into the busy corridors of Way Station 12, with its crowds of humans and aliens going about their business. Velara stayed close to him, closer than usual, and when they passed a group of loud merchants arguing over prices, she reached out and grabbed his sleeve. Her grip was tight, almost desperate, and Daniel made no move to pull away. He simply adjusted his pace so she could keep up easily and guided her through the crowds toward the administrative section of the station. Lisa Monroe was waiting for him outside the liaison office, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and her expression worried. She had been his friend since their days in the military, and he trusted her more than almost anyone else in the galaxy. "Daniel," she said, reaching out to clasp his hand warmly, "it is good to see you, but I wish it was under better circumstances. What do you mean? Daniel asked, noticing the way Lisa's eyes flickered to Velara, and then back to him. Lisa pulled him aside slightly, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Something is happening with the Kethari, she explained. Rumors have been flying around for weeks now. Talk of internal conflicts within the royal family. Power struggles, that kind of thing. She glanced at Velara again, her expression troubled. I do not know why they sent a princess to live on a human cargo ship, but I have a feeling it was not really about cultural exchange. Daniel felt his jaw tighten, his suspicions from the past 8 months suddenly feeling a lot more solid. Can you find out more? He asked. Lisa nodded slowly. I can try, but it will take some time. And you need to be careful. She hesitated before adding, whatever is going on, that girl is caught in the middle of it. And I do not think the people coming for her have her best interests at heart. Before Daniel could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them all turn. Ambassador Korath Shenkai walked toward them with a delegation of Kethari officials behind him. His expression cold and arrogant. He was taller than Velara, his silver skin darker and marked with intricate patterns that indicated his high status when he looked at his sister. There was no warmth in his eyes, only disdain. Princess, he said in the Kethari language, his tone sharp and commanding. You will come with us now. Daniel watched as Velara lowered her head, her shoulders hunching as if she was trying to make herself smaller. Every bit of progress she had made, every small sign of life he had seen in her eyes, seemed to disappear in an instant. Korath spoke to Daniel without really looking at him, treating him as something beneath his notice. The observation period is complete, he announced. The princess will be returning to Kethari space permanently. What did you learn from the observation? Daniel asked, keeping his voice steady even, though anger was burning in his chest. Korath's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Everything we needed to know, he said, dismissively. Your species is exactly as primitive and emotional as we expected. He turned and began walking away, clearly expecting Velara to follow without question, and she did, because that was what she had been trained to do her entire life. But Daniel saw her hands trembling at her sides, saw the way her steps faltered slightly as she moved away from him that night, after the Kethari delegation had returned to their ship, and Daniel had been left alone with his thoughts. He found Velara sitting in the cargo bay of the dusty Horizon. She was curled up in a corner with her knees pulled to her chest, her silver skin almost glowing in the dim emergency lights. Daniel walked over and sat down beside her without saying a word. He did not try to make conversation, did not ask if she was okay, because he already knew the answer. Instead, he simply sat there with her, letting her know that she was not alone. They stayed like that for hours, the silence between them no longer feeling empty, but somehow full of all the things she could not say and all the things he wished he could do to help her. When Daniel finally stood to go to bed, exhausted from the long day, he found Velara standing outside his quarters. Her mouth was open, her lips moving as if she was trying to form words, but no sound came out. The frustration and desperation in her eyes was almost too much to bear. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the ship, leaving Daniel with more questions than he had ever had before. He lay awake for a long time that night, thinking about the silent princess and the secrets she carried, wondering what had been done to her and why she was so afraid to speak. And somewhere deep inside him, a determination began to grow, a determination to find out the truth and to help her, no matter what it cost him. The next morning, Daniel sent a message to Lisa asking her to dig deeper into the Kethari royal family, specifically anything she could find about Princess Velara. Lisa had warned him that it might be dangerous to ask too many questions, but Daniel did not care. He needed to understand what was happening, needed to know why this girl had been sent to him and why she was so terrified of going home while he waited for Lisa to respond. Daniel decided to take Velara to the observation deck on the upper level of the station. It was a massive room with transparent walls that looked out into the endless expanse of space. And it was usually filled with travelers taking a moment to rest and enjoy the view when they arrived. Velara stopped just inside the doorway, her dark eyes widening as she took in the sight. It was not the stars that caught her attention, though. It was the people human families sat together on benches, children running and laughing between the rows of seats while their parents called after them with fond exasperation. A young couple stood near the window holding hands, pointing at distant galaxies and whispering to each other. An elderly man sat alone reading a book. A peaceful smile on his face. Velara watched all of this with an expression Daniel had never seen on her before, a mixture of longing and confusion, as if she was seeing something beautiful that she did not understand. Daniel led her to a quiet corner where they could sit and observe without being in the middle of the crowd. This is what humans do when they have free time, he explained, keeping his voice casual. We spend it with people we care about, or we find peaceful places to rest and think. Velara turned to look at him, a question in her eyes, even though she could not ask it. Daniel understood anyway. Yes, even strangers like us can sit here, he said with a small smile. No one will bother us. No one will judge us, and we can stay as long as we want. He leaned back against the wall and began talking. Just as he had done so many times on the ship, he told her about Earth, about the small town where he grew up, and the fields of wheat that turned golden in the summer. Son, he told her about his mother who had taught him to cook and his father who had taught him to fix things. He told her about joining the military because he wanted to help people, about becoming a medic because he could not stand the thought of watching someone suffer when he had the power to ease their pain. And then, without really planning to, he told her about his squad. There were 6 of us, he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the stars outside the window. We had been together for 3 years, had been through everything together, and I thought we would all make it home. His voice caught slightly, old grief rising to the surface. We were on a rescue mission when everything went wrong, and by the time it was over, I was the only one left. He turned to look at Velara and found her watching him with something new in her expression. Empathy, understanding, a shared knowledge of loss. That is why I left the military. He continued. I could not save them, and I did not know how to live with that failure. So I bought a ship and started running cargo to the edges of known space. He smiled sadly. I thought being alone would make things easier, but it turns out humans are not meant to be alone. Velara reached out slowly and placed her hand on his arm. The first time she had ever touched him deliberately, it was a small gesture, but it meant more to Daniel than he could express. His communicator beeped, breaking the moment, and he looked down to see a message from Lisa. She had found what he was looking for, and she needed to see him immediately. Daniel found Lisa in a small private room in the administrative section, her expression grave as she handed him a data tablet. You are not going to like this, she warned. Daniel read through the information slowly, his stomach sinking with every word. In Cathari culture, the royal family operated under ancient traditions that most humans would consider. Babarik, the youngest child of each generation, was designated as the spare, a backup heir to be used only if all other children failed or died. The spare child was raised differently from their siblings, trained from birth to be silent and invisible, to have no voice and no identity of their own. They were not allowed to speak unless directly commanded to by someone of higher rank. They were not allowed to have opinions, preferences, or desires. They existed only as a living insurance policy, a shadow that followed the real heirs and waited to be needed. She has been forbidden to speak since the day she was born, Lisa said softly. It is not that she cannot speak. It is that she has been taught her entire life that she does not deserve to. Daniel felt sick. his hands gripping the tablet so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Why was she sent to me? He demanded. Lisa hesitated before answering. From what I can gather, she broke the rules somehow, showed emotion in public, questioned a decision, something that embarrassed the family. She shook her head in disgust. Sending her to live with humans was punishment, a reminder of her worthlessness. Daniel thought about all the months Velara had spent on his ship, watching him live his simple human life, seeing kindness and freedom and choice for the first time, and now they wanted to take her back to that prison, to silence her again and erase whatever small spark of hope had begun to grow inside her. Returned to the observation deck and found Velara still sitting where he had left her, her eyes fixed on a human mother, comforting her crying child. Daniel sat down beside her and took a deep breath. I know why you did not speak, he said gently. I know what they did to you, and I need you to understand something. Velara turned to face him, fear flickering in her eyes. You are allowed to have a voice, Daniel continued, his words firm but kind. Whatever they told you, whatever they made you believe, it was wrong, and it was cruel, and it was not your fault. He reached out and took her hand carefully, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. She did not pull away. You matter, he said, not as a spare, not as a shadow, but as a person, and your voice deserves to be heard. A single tear rolled down Velara's silver cheek, catching the starlight and shimmering like a tiny galaxy. She did not speak, but for the first time, Daniel saw something in her eyes that looked like belief. And then Ambassador Korath arrived with his guards, his cold voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere of the observation deck. It is time, he announced. The princess will return home now. Velara rose to her feet slowly, her hand slipping from Daniel's grasp, and began walking toward her brother with the obedience of a lifetime of training. But she hesitated at the last moment, looking back at Daniel with an expression that shattered his heart. Gratitude, sorrow, and a desperate wish for something she did not believe she could have. Then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd of Kethari officials, and Daniel was left alone with the weight of everything he had learned. Daniel stood frozen for only a moment before something inside him snapped. He had spent his whole life following rules and respecting boundaries and staying in his lane. And where had it gotten him? His squad was dead. He was alone, and now a girl, who had just started to believe she might be worth something, was being dragged back to a life of silence and invisibility. Not this time. He pushed through the crowd and caught up with the Kethari delegation just as they reached the corridor leading to the docking bays. Ambassador Korath, he called out, his voice loud enough to turn heads. The ambassador stopped and turned slowly, his expression one of irritated disbelief that a human would dare address him so directly. You have something to say, cargo pilot? He asked with obvious contempt. I have a question, Daniel replied, planting himself directly in the delegation's path. Why was Princess Velara really sent to observe humans? Korath's eyes narrowed dangerously. That is not your concern. I think it is, Daniel countered. She lived on my ship for 8 months, and in all that time she never spoke a single word, never ate in front of anyone, never did anything except watch and follow and wait. He took a step closer, ignoring the guards who shifted uneasily around him. That is not observation. That is imprisonment. A murmur ran through the gathered crowd, humans and aliens alike stopping to watch the confrontation unfold. Korath's silver skin darkened with anger, the patterns on his face shifting in ways that Daniel could not interpret. You know nothing of our ways, the ambassador spat. The princess has a role to play in our society, and she will fulfill it as she was born to do. What role? Daniel demanded. Being invisible? Being silent? Existing as nothing more than a backup in case you fail? The words hit their mark, and Korath's composure cracked for just a moment before he recovered. She was sent here because she forgot her place. He hissed. Abandoning any pretense of diplomacy, she showed emotion in public. Questioned traditions that have existed for thousands of years. Tried to speak when she had no right to. His voice dripped with disgust. Living among primitive humans was supposed to remind her of what happens to those who do not know their worth. Daniel felt cold fury building in his chest. But he kept his voice steady. And what is her worth, Ambassador? In your eyes, what is Princess Velara worth? Korath smiled, a cruel expression that made Daniel want to punch him. She is worth exactly what we decide she is worth. No more. No less. Daniel turned to look at Velara, who stood with her head bowed and her hands clasped in front of her. The perfect picture of submission, but he could see her trembling. Could see the way her fingers dug into her palms. Could see the tears she was fighting to hold back. I would like her to stay, Daniel said clearly, his voice carrying across the crowded corridor, not as a prisoner or an obligation, but as a guest, voluntarily, for as long as she wants. Korath laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. You cannot be serious, he said. She is a princess of the Cathari Empire, and you are nothing, a cargo pilot, a nobody, a representative of a species that has only been traveling among the stars for a few centuries. He turned to Velara and spoke in their native language, his tone commanding and absolute. Come, sister. We are leaving this place. Velara took one step forward, her body moving automatically in response to years of conditioning. Then she stopped. Daniel held his breath, watching as something shifted in her posture, a straightening of her spine, a lifting of her chin, a small but unmistakable act of defiance, and then, for the first time in her entire life, Princess Velara Shenkai spoke without permission. No, the word was rough and broken, scraped out of a throat that had been silent for decades. But it rang through the corridor like a bell. Every Cathari in the delegation froze, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and horror. Speaking without permission was unthinkable, unprecedented. A violation of everything their culture held sacred. Korath stared at his sister as if she had grown a second head. What did you say? He whispered. Velara lifted her eyes to meet his, and there was fire in them now. Fire that had been buried under years of oppression and silence. I said no, she repeated, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm not going back with you, and I am not going to be silent anymore. She turned to face Daniel, and the tears were flowing freely down her silver cheeks now, but she was smiling, a trembling, fragile smile that lit up her whole face. You asked me once why I never spoke, she said, her words halting but clear. I did not know how to answer because I did not know myself. She took a shaky breath. But I have been watching you for 8 months. Watching how you live, how you treat others, how you treat me. Her voice cracked with emotion. You showed me what kindness looks like, what respect looks like, what it means to see someone as a person instead of a thing. She reached out and took his hand, her grip tight and desperate. Every day I wanted to speak to you, wanted to thank you, wanted to tell you that you were saving me without even knowing it. She looked back at her brother, at the delegation, at the world that had tried to erase her. You gave me my voice back, she said to Daniel. You did not even know you were doing it, but you did, and I will not let them take it away again. Korath recovered from his shock, his face twisting with rage. This is unacceptable, he snarled. You will face consequences for this betrayal. Sister, consequences that will make you wish you had stayed silent. That is enough. A new voice cut in, and Lisa stepped forward with a squad of human security officers behind her. Held up a datapad displaying official documentation under human asylum protocols. Any being who requests protection from persecution can be granted sanctuary in human space. She looked at Velara with a gentle smile. Princess, do you request asylum? Velara nodded, her voice still rough but unwavering. "I do." Lisa turned to Korath, her expression hard. "Then she is under human protection now, Ambassador. And any attempt to remove her by force will be considered an act of aggression against the human government." Korath looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to do something to reclaim control of the situation. But he was surrounded by humans now, watched by dozens of witnesses, and even he knew when he was outmatched. "This is not over," he promised darkly. "There will be diplomatic repercussions, sanctions, consequences that your primitive species cannot even imagine." Daniel stepped forward, putting himself between Korath and Valara. "Maybe," he said calmly, "but she is staying. And nothing you say or do is going to change that." He looked the ambassador directly in the eyes. "Because that is what humans do. We stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves. Even when it costs us, even when it is hard, even when the whole galaxy tells us we should not." Korath held his gaze for a long moment, hatred burning in his dark eyes. Then he turned and walked away, his delegation following behind him, leaving Valara standing in the corridor surrounded by humans who had chosen to protect her. She was still crying, still shaking, but when she looked at Daniel, her smile was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel smiled back and squeezed her hand gently. "You did this yourself," he told her. "All I did was listen." 1 month had passed since the confrontation at Waystation 12, and life aboard the Dusty Horizon had changed in ways Daniel could never have predicted. Valar was still learning to speak freely, still getting used to the sound of her own voice after a lifetime of enforced silence. Some days she talked for hours, asking questions about everything she saw, sharing thoughts she had kept locked inside for years. Other days she was quiet again, retreating into herself when the weight of her past became too heavy to carry. But even on those quiet days, there was a difference. Her silence was a choice now, not a cage. And Daniel could see the peace in her eyes when she chose to simply sit and watch the stars without saying a word. The Kethari Empire had lodged formal protests with the human government. Just as Korath had promised, they demanded Valara's return, threatened economic sanctions, hinted at military action if their princess was not handed over immediately. The human government had responded calmly and firmly, refusing to return a person who had requested asylum and daring the Kethari to make good on their threats public. Opinion across human space had rallied behind Valara's story in a way no one had expected. News outlets had picked up the tale of the silent princess who had finally found her voice, and people were moved by her courage and outraged by what she had endured. Messages of support flooded in from every corner of human territory, from ordinary citizens who had been touched by her story and wanted her to know she was not alone. Valara had become a symbol of something larger than herself, a symbol of the human belief that every person, no matter their origin or status, deserved to be heard. Daniel watched her now as she stood at the kitchen counter of the Dusty Horizon, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to follow the recipe he had given her. "You need to stir it more gently," he said with a smile, coming up beside her to demonstrate. "If you go too fast, the eggs will get rubbery." Valara adjusted her technique, a small proud smile crossing her face when the eggs came out perfectly. "I have never cooked anything before," she said, her voice still carrying that rough quality from years of disuse on my homeworld. "Preparing food was considered beneath someone of my status." She laughed softly, a sound that still surprised Daniel every time he heard it. But then again, so was speaking, and look at me now. They ate breakfast together at the small metal table, talking about nothing important. The next cargo run, a book Valara had been reading, a funny story Daniel remembered from his childhood. It was ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of morning that millions of people across the galaxy experienced every day without thinking twice about it. But for Valara, It was a miracle after breakfast. Daniel taught her how to play cards. A simple game that his father had taught him when he was young. She was terrible at it. Her face too expressive to hide what she was thinking. But she laughed at her own failures and demanded rematch after rematch until she finally won a hand. "I did it!" she exclaimed, throwing her cards down triumphantly. "I defeated you." Daniel grinned at her enthusiasm, his heart full in a way it had not been for years. "Congratulations," he said. "You have mastered the ancient human art of go fish." Their laughter echoed through the small ship, filling the spaces that had been empty and silent for so long later that day. A message arrived from Lisa with news that made Valara go very quiet. There were reports of unrest within the Kethari Empire. Younger generations questioning the old traditions that had governed their society for thousands of years. Valara's act of defiance had sparked something, a conversation that had been forbidden, a possibility that had been unthinkable. Other spare children were beginning to question their roles, to wonder if they too deserved voices and identities of their own. Change was coming to the Kethari, slow and uncertain but real. And it had started with one princess who had refused to be silent any longer. Valara read the message several times, tears streaming down her face. "I never thought this would happen," she whispered. "I only wanted to save myself. And now others might be saved too." Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. "That is how change works," he said gently. "One person speaks up, and it gives others the courage to do the same." That evening, they sat together at the observation window. Watching the stars drift by in their endless dance. Valara was quiet for a long time, and Daniel let her think. Content to simply be there with her finally, she spoke, her voice soft and wondering. "Why do humans care so much about things that do not benefit them?" she asked. "You gained nothing by helping me, risked everything by standing against my brother, and yet you did it anyway." She turned to look at him, genuine curiosity in her dark eyes. "I have studied your species for months, and I still do not understand." Daniel thought about the question seriously. Turning it over in his mind, he thought about his squad, about the people he had lost, about all the times he had seen humans sacrifice their own comfort and safety for complete strangers. "I think," he said slowly, "it is because we have all been voiceless at some point." He looked out at the stars, his expression thoughtful. Every human knows what it feels like to be ignored, to be dismissed, to have something important to say and no one willing to listen. He turned back to Valara. "And because we know that pain, we cannot stand to see it in others, even if those others are completely different from us." She considered his words, her head tilted in that way she always did when she was thinking deeply. "So you help because you understand suffering," she said. "Yes," Daniel agreed, "but also because we understand how much it means when someone finally listens." Valara was quiet again, but this time there was peace in her silence, not the emptiness of forced submission, but the fullness of someone who has found their place in the universe. And then, for the first time since Daniel had known her, she smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded, that transformed her face into something radiant. "Thank you," she said, "not just for saving me, but for teaching me what it means to be free." Daniel smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in years. "Thank you for reminding me why being human matters." They sat together in comfortable silence as the dusty horizon sailed on through the endless night. Two people from different worlds who had found something precious in each other. Outside the window, the stars burned bright against the darkness, each one a distant sun with its own planets and peoples and stories. And somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing, one voice at a time, because a human cargo pilot had shown a silent princess that she deserved to speak. It was not a grand victory or a dramatic ending, just two people sitting together, watching the stars, believing in the possibility of something better. But sometimes, That was enough. Sometimes, that was everything.